Hi, welcome back to Broken and Brilliant. I'm Carrie O'Toole with Carrie O'Toole Ministries. And today I am joined by probably my favorite guest ever. This is my daughter, Katie. So welcome, Katie.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Thanks for being brave. Yeah, we can do this. Katie and I have been talking for several months now. She's helped me some with some coaching. And we've been talking about, wouldn't it be cool to do a podcast together, talking about what it was like specifically for you being the sibling of a child with Reactive Attachment Disorder, or RAD. And it's kind of a big deal because you've never really talked about this in public.
Not in public, no. I've shared my story with some friends and family, but not on the big screen, as it were.
Yes, and we've got a little screen today, but you never know. So I've had clients who have said, could my kids talk to Katie? Because it would be so amazing for them to be able to talk to somebody who's been through what they're going through. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of how this all came about. So what we're hoping is, this video is specifically for parents of children with reactive attachment disorder, as well as their older, say like 9 and up maybe, kids that are siblings of kids with reactive attachment disorder. And we need you to understand that our story is that we ended up placing our son into a new home 11 years ago. That may not be your story, and that's okay. We're going to talk both about what it was like while he was in our home, as well as what it was like when we made the decision to place him in a new home, and how we've recovered and healed since then. So just want you to know that it's kind of a parent caution. Maybe you watch it first before you watch it with your kids, or decide whether it's something that's appropriate for them. So there's our disclaimer before we start. So Katie, why don't you share just a little bit about, like, how old were you? How did this all come about? What it was like for you getting your new brother? And let's just have a chat.
Right from the beginning, all right?
Yeah.
Well, so I was 7 when we ended up going to Vietnam to adopt my little brother. And before that, I remember my older brother and I came to you and Dad.
I remember too.
We were like, please, can we have a little brother? We just really want a little brother. And we just kept begging, and finally, you're like, okay, let's do this.
Well, and one other funny little thing that I remember is I had struggled with infertility, and you guys kept asking for this brother, and I said, Mom's body doesn't work that great, and you're like, ew, gross, we don't want a baby, we want a brother, duh. Yeah.
We want him to be ready to play, like, don't do that annoying roly-poly stuff.
Exactly.
So I was 7 when we went to Vietnam, and it was crazy just being in this different culture so young. And you might not know it now, but I had really long blonde hair. So being blonde-haired, blue-eyed, it was very different in the Vietnamese people. Yeah. So while we were there, it was very interesting because a lot of people wanted to come up and touch my hair, and they would say, oh, your child is so beautiful, and I'm, oh, thank you, but then they would try to take me away from you guys, and that was a little scarier.
They don't really have a bubble, like there's not a personal bubble like we have here, so they would just walk up to you, and everybody would start touching you.
Like, Mommy!
I'm like, it's okay, sweetie, they just love your beautiful hair.
Right. So already we were kind of just in this world that we didn't know, and I was 7, so I didn't know how to react or anything, but it was also kind of a fun experience. So we went to the orphanage, and we met Sam for the first time, and I felt like we hit it off pretty well from the beginning. He was one of the older kids in the nursing home, or not nursing home, the orphanage. Yeah. And so he was always like the one who was giving gifts to the younger kids. He was helping out. He was very supportive of everybody. So I was like, hey, this is a good kid. And we got along really easily from the beginning because I was able to play with him. I remember one of the first days in the orphanage, I was on the outside of the building and he was on the inside, and I was playing peekaboo with him through the little curtains.
And he was laughing.
Oh yeah. Like, he couldn't understand what I was saying, but I mean, I feel like peekaboo is kind of a universal game that everybody can kind of understand. So he was understanding that it was fun, and he was only, what, 3, 4?
He was almost 4, 3.5.
3.5, yeah. So, there was a little bit of an age gap, but I felt like we hit it off pretty easily. I remember I gave him some Cheez-Its, and he loved that, and then he passed them around to all his friends. And so that was really cool, because I was like, hey, I've got a brother, it's awesome. And then we brought him home, and for a while it actually felt kind of like that. It felt like I had a brother. He was fun to play with, and we got along really well. And then I don't remember exactly when, but suddenly it's like everything just started changing.
Well, and just a quick pause here for those of you watching. Kids who come from a great deal of trauma bring the trauma into the new home. Mm-hmm. And so we both struggle with memories of when things happen. And it's like, when was that? And we look back at pictures, and there are times we don't even remember us being in the picture. Like, when did we go there? I don't have any memory of that. So the fact that you don't really remember how things started going poorly or when it happened, that's trauma.
Yeah. Sam was with us for 8 years, and I don't remember most of those 8 years.
Yeah.
So, looking back on my memories, it's like, when did that happen? I can't remember. It's like, I sometimes remember memories by which house we lived in rather than what age I was.
And do you remember why we moved?
So the first house we moved because Sam and Brendan were sharing a room. And then in the second house we moved to, Sam and I were sharing
a bathroom.
A bathroom, yes, a bathroom. And so then we moved so that I wouldn't be sharing a bathroom with him, and then we moved and we were all on a different floor of the house. So
we kept trying to find some situation that would work. And, at first we thought, let's have the boys share bathrooms. They fought like crazy, and it was just a daily battle. And I know, we've talked about this. People say, well, siblings fight, and that happens.
Not quite like this.
This is not the same as just regular old attached, non-traumatized sibling rivalry or sibling fighting. We never really had a bond with him. We tried, and you probably had the best bond of anybody.
I think I did.
Yeah.
Or Dad.
Right. Yeah. And it wasn't really based on like a true love relationship attachment with trust and all of that, but you guys had the fewest problems anyway. Mm-hmm. So we moved from that first house thinking, well, Katie and Sam do better together, so maybe we'll put them sharing a bathroom. They had a little Jack and Jill, each had their own room, but they shared the bathroom. But share a little bit about what happened there.
So we were living in that house around the time I was like between the ages of like 10 and 14, maybe 10 and 13, something like that. So if you know girls, that's around the time that girls go through puberty. So sharing a bathroom with a brother while you're going through all of that is always a little awkward in the first place. But with Sam, it was a little different because he would constantly try to get into the bathroom while I was trying to figure puberty out. And he would bang on the door for like minutes on end. He would start crying. He would go running to you guys complaining that I was hurting him or that I was being mean. And he was a master manipulator in that sense, where he would get you guys to believe that I was actually doing something wrong. Mm-hmm. And then, then I would have my parents coming over saying, unlock this door right now, come out of the bathroom. And I'm like, what do I do? So it was a very trying time during that time. Mm-hmm. But then also at night, Sam would get really concerned about just, am I still around? He would want to know that I was still in the house. So he'd come into my room and stare at me
while you're sleeping.
While I was asleep for like minutes on end, I'm assuming, because as soon as I woke up, he would run out of the room as fast as he could. Some of the times that he was staring at me, he'd be like stroking my face, kind of like this, and I would wake up and see my brother
just touching your hair.
Right, and I would see my brother in front of me stroking my face in a very intimate gesture that was not comfortable with me at all. And then he'd run away before I could talk to him about it. And because of that, I ended up having some pretty severe insomnia develop over that time, and it lasted for many years after he was gone too. So So that's why we decided to put us on different floors.
Yes. And I just want to touch both of those things that happen in that house and give a little bit of explanation. So the thing about trying to come in the room and then coming and telling mom and dad that she did something, that's very typical for kids with reactive attachment disorder. And being a parent of a child like this is super trying because we really want to believe them, and we know that a lot of their behaviors are due to their trauma. It's not that they're just evil children or, lying on purpose just to get her in trouble. It's a survival technique that comes out of trauma. Mm-hmm. But for parents, we're never quite sure what to believe. And he was very convincing in his acting. And sometimes we'd kind of go, well, the other two have it all together and you don't have all these problems. So you can maybe put up with a little bit more, and we'd try to believe him and say, hey, come on, guys. And years later, we look back and go, oh my gosh, we put a lot on them that was not their stuff. And I remember one time Brendan we were trying to watch a movie or something, and he was doing stuff over here bothering everybody. And Brendan finally just said, go away. And I remember getting so angry at Brendan because oh, you're so impatient and everything. But then I recognized I can't even do it.
Right.
And here I am trying to get my 9 or 10-year-old to be able to do it. It's hard for anybody. So that's that issue. But the issue about the touching your face and your hair and coming in your room, we talked to a psychiatrist about that at one point. It's like, why does he have these very specific kind of weird things that he does? He said, if you think about it, when he was in the orphanage, he's laying next to all of his friends, and he could wake up from a nap and somebody's gone. Somebody got adopted and they're just taken. And so he had a constant concern. Every day he would say, what time is daddy coming home? What time are we eating? What time? Where is everybody? He always wanted to know where everybody was. And so I think he had this special care and concern for Katie. And so he'd go to bed and he'd get panicked, not knowing where she was, but instead of talking, and he didn't know, and we didn't understand. And we didn't know this was happening for Katie. So here's our precious little girl upstairs being traumatized every night, and we didn't know. So
it got to the point where, because the Jack and Jill bathroom had separate locks, I would lock his side once he went to sleep, but my room didn't have a lock. And I remember begging you guys for a door lock at the time, but Brendan was going through some stuff at that time, and he actually didn't have a door on his bedroom at that point. So it was like, well, if he doesn't get a door, then why should you get a door lock? And it's not like it was comparable. It was just because I was so afraid of him coming in.
This just messes up families.
So,
absolutely.
It was just a really hard time for all of us, and I didn't feel super comfortable about coming and telling you guys about what was going on, because he had all these other issues already. And I knew you guys were trying to help, and I knew he wasn't doing this on purpose or trying to be vindictive or even hurtful. He was just concerned for me, but I also couldn't get him to stop, and it was being very difficult for me to live.
And there was no reasoning with him. We would talk, before, as we were preparing for this, we talked about how he wanted to be your friend. But he would do things that are the exact opposite of what friends do. And so Dad and I would sit and talk with him and say, sweetie, let's talk about what does it mean to be a friend. This and this and this and this. And then the next, he would immediately turn around and do the exact opposite. And then come crying, why don't they want to be my friend? Okay, sweetie, remember we talked about this, and are you doing this? Yes. Okay, well,
don't do that.
Share a little bit about in the house where you were sharing the bathroom, because you had a good friend across the street.
Yeah, I did.
Share about that a little bit and what she saw and what it was like for you in those years.
Yeah, she was amazing. So this house we moved to, we actually had it built from the ground up before we moved in. And while the house was being built, we went and looked at it. So seeing the foundation, and
Mm-hmm.
there were dirt piles everywhere. And this friend from across the street came out to meet me because she was like, hey, new kids, I want to go meet them. So I remember we were sitting on the dirt piles of our house, or what was going to be our house, and we were just talking and talking and talking. And from then we were like really great friends.
Mm-hmm.
And she was even in my wedding. And
Mm-hmm.
she was like, I think one of the only things that kept me sane during that whole time, because I remember there'd be days where I'd come home after school and Sam would be there, and like the second he came in the room, I'm like, I can't do this, and I would run over to my friend's house, and I would just talk to her about everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just like, I can't stand him anymore, I can't do it. And at first she didn't quite understand, but sometimes she would come over to my house and she would see what was going on, and she was like, oh, okay, I get it. Like,
Can you, I'm putting you on the spot, but can you think of any things, and I know this is hard because our brains, due to the trauma, sometimes we don't have memories, or we look back and go, why was that such a big deal? But
Right.
do you remember, like from her perspective, or can you remember the things that he was doing?
I have a couple very specific memories, and we were talking about this a few weeks ago, and while I was talking about it, it didn't sound that bad. And so I had to kind of go back into my memories and go, why was that so bad? And so one of the memories that I have is one of my rooms. I was not great at keeping my room clean when I was little. And I wanted to go to a friend's birthday party or go hang out or something. And you guys told me you're not allowed to go until you clean up your room. So I did. And the day of the party or the hangout, I woke up and my room was trashed. And I had gone to sleep the night before and it was clean. And then I wake up, I had this little disco lamp. It was on and spinning. I never kept that on. It was right after Easter, and all my Easter candy was eaten, and the wrappers were all over the floor. My clothes literally were just like pulled out of my drawers and like thrown everywhere. And obviously, like, I had cleaned that. And so then I don't remember if it was you or Dad, but one of you came down and said, oh, your room's not clean, you're not going. And I was like, this wasn't me. And you didn't believe me because it's my room. And why else would it be dirty if I didn't clean it? So it took a couple of weeks, but eventually Sam confessed to doing that because he wanted me to stay home and play with him. And so, you know, that kind of sounds like something a sibling would do, to either be just kind of mean or like mean, or you don't get to go to a party. But I'm realizing the reason why something like that was so difficult was because of the consistency of it. So he did that, but then he also did several other things similar to that, like all within the span of like one day. And it was just all these little things to try to manipulate the situation to be how he wanted it to be. And instead of talking about things or saying, I want you to stay home and play with me, or even apologizing and saying, I'm sorry I did this because I wanted this. It was like, that would happen. And then, you know, another thing later that day would happen that was the same way.
Right.
And it wasn't the same situation, but it was just the fact that every single day there were things going on that he was manipulating that either I was blamed for,
Right.
or he would blame on me, and either it was believed or not. But I was just like having to be so vigilant to try to prove myself honest and try to prove myself trustworthy, even though I wasn't doing anything. So
Right.
I was just
and
getting
even if it
bombarded.
even if it wasn't against you, there were things in
With
our
other
family that, you know, you would want to do something and then he would do something to somebody else, so then we couldn't go.
Right.
Or whatever. You
Yeah,
know,
it's like, I want to go to a movie, and we planned to go to a movie, and then he gets in trouble with Brendan, and then we have to stay home and fix his mess, or
they're not in a place, everybody's fighting, so
Right.
they're not in a place to even go anywhere together.
So it's
Nobody
like, we're
wants
just
to
staying
go.
home. Okay. So
Yeah.
so like things like that. And my friend across the street saw a lot of this happen because she'd come over and she'd see all those little cogs being turned by him, and just notice like, that's not normal, and that's really tough to have to deal with every day. So I would go over to her house and I would spend the night a lot of times, and even if not, I would just go do my homework over at her place. And her parents were great with being very understanding, because, you know, I think a lot of times nowadays it's like you wouldn't let your kid go spend an entire week with somebody else, but you guys were understanding because you knew I needed to get away.
And we had talked with their parents,
right,
too, and they knew what was going on, and so they're like, hey, if there's any way we can help, and yeah, can our kids come over some? Because Brendan went over there too and played with their son.
Right,
he played games.
He was a little older,
yeah, he was older, but they kind of just put up with that.
Yeah.
You guys were behaving yourselves and everything.
Right.
So
we tried to be nice guests, and they were amazing hosts. So yeah, it was actually, I think one of the reasons why it got so hard for me later on was because they ended up moving. And so then I'm in this house where he's constantly coming in at night and stroking my face and staring at me, and my friend is gone. And I have nobody to talk to about it, because at the time I was homeschooled. So I had like no friends. I had one friend who I had had forever, and she's still one of my best friends, but she lived so far away. We only saw her like, I don't know, every couple of weeks or so. So I was feeling very alone. And
and that was one of the reasons that we moved to the next house.
Right. The last one.
Before this one. And that house we bought specifically with, I mean, we were looking for a very specific floor plan. So we wanted a finished basement so that our oldest son could go down there. We wanted you upstairs with us, and we wanted a main floor bedroom for him. So that we're like, okay, if everybody's on their own floor and everybody has their own bathroom,
we should be okay.
Maybe we'll be all right.
Yeah.
But no. So I think we were only in that house 9 months before we ended up placing him.
Yeah.
And, you know, I want you to know this is such a bigger story than what we're sharing today, because we're really trying to just get to Katie's experiences and to be able to help other siblings with that. But if you want to know the full story, we've got a book, we've got a film, we'll link them in the description and everything. But I want you to know this was not an easy or a light decision.
No, and in fact, that is something I think we can talk about, because that decision brought a lot of turmoil to our family, even though it ended up being what we all needed. So don't know if that's where we should go next.
You brought it up, let's do it.
All right, so that was during my sophomore year of high school.
There goes my trauma brain. I'm glad you remember.
I remember school years. I can't remember my own ages, but I can remember school years just because I remember who was around during that time, and my class changed significantly every year, so I knew who was around. So that was my sophomore year in high school, and it was in February, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yes, so it's been almost 11 years.
It's been 11 years and a week.
Oh, okay.
But who's counting? Yeah, anyway.
So I do remember, I think it was either the week before or the week after was Allstate.
Allstate Band.
Allstate Band, yeah. Was it the week before or after?
It was after, because he had already gone, and then while we were gone to Allstate, he came home and stayed with Dad.
Okay, so my last time
him.
that I saw him was before that. So, so I made Allstate Band that year, and I was so excited about it. And then all of this was going on, and we were talking about not having me go to Allstate, and I got so mad. I was like, you can't do this to me. Like, this is the one thing I've been looking forward to all year, and just because he's having an issue, you know, and, that can be one of our topics of questions, but I remember you ended up saying, okay, we're gonna go. Yeah. And so it's a weekend, so we went up to Greeley.
And I went with you, and I ended up being your sponsor because you were homeschooled.
Right.
So you couldn't go with another school, and you had to have a sponsor, and that was really the issue. It's like, can I get away? Can we do this? We don't have another place for you to go.
Well, I wasn't homeschooled, I was in a small school, but...
Oh, that's right. And they didn't have a band. Right. That was right. That's right. So I needed to be your sponsor and all of that.
So we had to go for the weekend because it was a whole weekend of rehearsals and a concert. And I remember, like, when I wasn't rehearsing and I was with Mom, we were just really sad the whole time. And that kind of put a damper on it, because I was so excited about this, and I invited my classmates to come, and nobody came, but that's, story of my life.
That's another story.
And so then during the concert, I was like so proud, but Dad didn't come because he was with Sam for the last weekend, and so then he wasn't at my Allstate concert, which I thought was this big deal.
It's like the culmination of everything.
Right. I've been practicing for years, and finally I get into this amazing band, and my dad can't even make it. My brother couldn't make it.
And just real quick, as we go, we're probably going to do several podcasts, and we're going to invite your questions. And I've already done that some in some Facebook groups that I'm in, and with some of my clients. And one of my clients, actually, her daughter said, were there ever times, her specific thing was, it was her last soccer game that she was ever going to play. And her sibling was throwing a fit in the bathroom and screaming, and they couldn't get her to calm down. The family had to miss, and she had to miss her last soccer game. And she said, does that happen to other people?
Yes, it does. Unfortunately. And, it's like, in that situation, it couldn't have really happened any other way unless the weekend was shifted. But there's just some things where it's like, it really stinks, because you want your family to be there for you, but there's another sibling that needs more attention than you do. And so then you end up sacrificing for that. And so that was really tough. And
let's talk about that a little bit more too. Let's talk about the idea of there is one child in the family, or maybe more, who have this disorder that really disrupts the family and really takes a lot out of the parents, to the point that the parents literally, like every one of my clients as well as me, we all have PTSD from parenting these kids. And so you've got a parent now that has PTSD, at least one. You may have PTSD yourself. Everybody's struggling with a little bit or a lot of anxiety and depression. There's all kinds of mental health issues going on. It's a strain on the marriage. It's a strain on other siblings. And so what does that do to you as a child?
Well, for me, I can only share my experiences, but from talking with other kids in a similar situation, I can say that there are a lot of similarities between it. So first of all, I was the good kid. I was the kid that never got into trouble, except when I was blamed for things that I never actually did. So I was the one that was like always expected to be good. And so that expectation was like what I came to associate for myself. So I would always do everything asked except for clean my room. That was my rebellious area.
Yes.
I would not clean my room.
You were good at that one. You were good at not cleaning your room.
I was so good at that. But like other than that, like I was always ready to go. I was always on time. I would get to school on time. I would do my homework. I was responsible. I would stay out of the way. I didn't have any problems. Yeah, like I was the good child, and I'm not saying this to brag. I'm just saying that the way I behaved in the family was the good child. So if I did anything out of line of that, then suddenly like I felt like the family was falling apart. So I kept the family together in my mind by being the good kid. I remember you were doing this discipline technique called holding, and you would do that with both Brendan and Sam. And at one point I was like, can you hold me? Because I just wanted to be close. And I was like, this can be one-on-one time for us. And I remember, so you held me, and I was just like, this is nice. Why did I hate it so much?
I'm laying there next to you thinking, okay, is she going to start fighting? Because I'm so used to that. And you just laid there, and we were there for like 45 minutes or an hour. And finally I said, well, how was this for you? And you said, it was pretty good. Your breath stinks a little, but it was pretty good.
I think I remember it was a little warm too, but like other than that, I was like, hey, this is kind of nice. I don't know why they hate it so much, because I remember watching and listening to them scream the whole time, and I'm like, don't know why that's so horrible, but okay. So as the good kid, I behaved to get by in the family and to help the family survive. However, when I did have a need, I felt like I was often overlooked. And it's that old saying of the squeaky wheel gets the
oil.
Yeah. I was going to say something totally different. Yeah.
It's that old saying that I'm not old enough to remember.
I mean, I've heard it, but I was going to say something else.
Yeah.
So I was not the squeaky wheel. I was the nice, smooth wheel. And so therefore, who needs oil on that wheel?
Yeah. Can I speak into that just real quick too? For parents, we're so thankful for this. And yet, I can look back now and see that anytime she did do anything that caused even a little squeak, it could so threaten my stability, because he was taking me down, taking me out. I depended on her just doing what she was supposed to do. And so there were some times that she didn't, or as we were just talking about preparing for this, she had asthma. And there were times that I thought she was faking it because she just wanted more attention. And how horrible as a parent to look at our children who are not coming into the family with trauma, who are attached, and we start seeing them differently through the eyes of all of this trauma, through the fog of our own falling apart. And so we've had a lot of making up. I've had a lot of making up, a lot of asking forgiveness, a lot of saying, how can I make this up to you? We've done this many times. This is not the first time. I did it again today as we were preparing for this. Yes. It's kind of a constant. So for parents, I just want you to know, it's like, as you start healing, if you're in the middle of trauma, this is super, super hard and you need some help doing it. But if you're healing, as you're healing, you'll start recognizing some of the ways that you hurt your other kids that you had no intention of doing. But it's so important to start making amends. And what that means is you're not just saying, I'm sorry. You're not making justifications for why you did it. You're not saying, well, you don't understand. Because it really doesn't matter to you why I did it.
Right.
I mean, I think you have some compassion now as you're older. And as you're a mom, you're starting to figure some of these things out, and you will more as it goes. But it doesn't matter to your kids why you did it. They don't need to hear your whole sad story. You need to go get some help, and then you need to be able to suck it up when they bring things to you. Even, and we've talked about this, even if her understanding and remembrance of it is different than what I remember. Because trauma does that sometimes, and maybe I'm wrong.
And maybe I'm wrong, but it's just the way we both remember things. If there's even a little bit of pain, that can cause a big separation.
Yes.
Whether it's actually real or not.
Because we've not always done this well. And there have been times that Katie has come to me and said, Mom, this really hurt me. And I'm like, I didn't do that. Well, that totally minimizes her.
Right.
And it just keeps the pain. And now she's resentful of me. So there's been some anger that we've had to work through the years, that we continue to work through the years.
And I think part of that is just a normal parent-child relationship, but there's just that added bit of trauma that you're working
just that added bit of trauma.
Just a little bit, but it's more important, and it's also harder, I think.
Yes. Well, because for whichever party feels like they're being accused of something, if you know that you didn't really do it, or that wasn't your intention, or that's not how you remember it, you want to set the record straight. And it's like, that does not help anything, because her record is straight in her mind. And there have been times I've been proven wrong, and there have been times you've been proven wrong.
But when you're asking for
relationship,
that's not the time to set the record straight. We've had things before where I come to you and you're like, that's not how it happened, and then we get mad at each other. Or we've had times where I've said, this hurt me, and you've said, I'm sorry, and then weeks later, it gets brought up again, and you say, that's not how I remember it. And because I've already had that healing, it's like, oh, was it different? And then the record was set straight, and it's like, oh, that's good to know that I was remembering that wrong. So even though I've had healing from it, I also can know that actually was not what happened. Right. So, sorry. That's right. Around this time that this was going on, I remember we had been kind of talking about it kind of as a family, but I know you and Dad had been talking about it a lot more just by the two of you. And when the decision was finally made, I remember when you told me, I got really mad. And I was like, how could you do this? You're giving up my brother. And I remember it was really hard to hear. And I was mad for a long time. But I also remember during that time when you told me, I felt huge relief. And like I was fighting just because it was like, I have to. Mm-hmm. That's just what I'm supposed to do. I'm the good child, so I have to make sure my brother is still here.
Mm-hmm. Well, and nobody's ever heard of this before.
Right. I mean,
now we hear about it now.
But before this happened, I had never heard of this happening.
Neither had I.
At all. And so I'm like, this is awful. Why would we do this? And, I still loved him. He was still my brother. It was just, he was not able to attach to us, and he was not able to
live. He was miserable.
Right. He was not able to live happily in our family because of that lack of attachment. So when you told me, I was mad, but I was also relieved. And I fought, even though I was so ready for him to be gone. So it was really tough for me because I'm like, how do I balance out these two very different and very strong emotions of relief and also anger at the same time, because they seem so totally apart. Mm-hmm. And I remember when he did leave, the majority of me felt anger and sadness, but I also still had that relief in the back of my mind. And it took a long time for the anger and sadness to fade, and I had a lot of help with that. And then suddenly it was all just like relief and settling down and being able to live in a non-chaotic, non-trauma filled environment. And then our family was able to start healing after that, but it took a long time.
Yeah. And I love your picture here, and I use that actually with clients, especially when I'm talking to kids who are either living with a sibling that has reactive attachment disorder and they're struggling, or they are facing their sibling having to leave their home. And it's like, I'm really, really sad, but I also am having such a hard time. And I talk about it's okay to have both of these. That isn't that weird, but that's what life is. We have some really tough stuff and we have some really good stuff.
Right. I was like 15, so it's a little harder to understand. Now I feel like I understand it a little bit better.
Right.
But at the time, it was really hard to understand because you don't typically have those very complex emotions until later on in life.
Yeah. And you had to, that's one thing about siblings of RAD. You had to grow up. You had to face some emotions that a lot of people don't have to face that young. You had to learn to grieve. You had to learn to deal with big, intense feelings of anger and sadness and fear and anxiety and depression and all of that kind of stuff. And I want you to be able to share a little bit about, like, after he was gone, what was that like for you? And then let's talk a little bit more about how you healed from this, and then we'll conclude today and we'll keep on going another time.
So I would say this part is where that parental disclaimer comes into play a little bit. Just before, if you're watching this with your kids, I would recommend watching this by yourself first. Because right after he left, I was diagnosed with clinical depression, and I was started on meds as soon as we found out.
I remember you didn't want to take the meds, so we were doing some supplements, and you ended up going to band camp that summer, and you did so poorly at band camp. You played well, but emotionally, you came home and said, I can't do this.
Yeah, it was like, so he left in February, and the band camp was in June, and when I came home, I could not get out of bed. Like, I literally would wake up and I would just lay there until you forced me to get out. And sometimes I would go eat, I'd go to the bathroom, and I would get back in bed. And that happened day after day after day. And so...
And you were seeing a counselor.
I was seeing a counselor,
this time,
yes.
Because we got her in. I think it's very, very important for parents to pay attention to what's going on in the siblings and know the signs of depression so that you can get help.
Right.
Because we started you off pretty quick.
Right. So, the distance between February and June, not too far. And I don't feel like those symptoms showed up quite right afterwards. So
Mm-hmm.
once they started showing up, it was in a couple of weeks that we got me diagnosed,
Mm-hmm.
started me on supplements and started me on meds.
Mm-hmm.
So it was all
And it took
pretty
a little
quick.
time for them to start working.
Right. So that's where I had the hardest time, because we went on a vacation because it was kind of like, let's try to have fun again as a family of 4 instead of a family of 5. And we were on a cruise ship. And we had gone on cruises before. I loved them.
Mm-hmm.
And the medicine hadn't quite kicked in yet. It said like it was going to take about 2 weeks for it to kick in. And I was in the middle of the first week when we went on this vacation. And I remember looking over the edge of the cruise ship and going, yeah, I could just jump off. And like, I was totally at peace with that idea. And later that, I didn't do it, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And later that night, I was in my room and I started crying because that scared me so badly. Because I was like, why would I think of that? And why was I so okay with that? Like, I mean, I guess I could understand like having that thought, but then being like, oh no, that would be terrible. But I was like, no, I could do that. That would probably be better. And that was so tough for me. So I was just in my room crying because like I jumped back to my senses almost, and I was like, wait, that's not what I want.
Mm-hmm.
But like, it was just like this time between where I was so depressed and the medicine kicking in, where I just couldn't handle the emotions and all the trauma that I had just been through, and it was really tough. So I didn't tell you guys about this until years later.
Yes, we heard about 2 years later.
Yes, and so I maybe should have shared that, but I didn't feel safe enough at the time to talk about it. So the rest of the cruise, I stayed away from the edge of that balcony because I was not going to tempt fate again. I was not going to risk having those same thoughts and feelings. And the medicine kicked in after about the second week, which was after we had gotten home. And suddenly I was like a new person, and I was like, oh goodness, that whole thing is gone. So thankfully I didn't have those feelings anymore.
You stayed on the medication for about 9 months, I think?
Almost a year.
Almost a year?
Yeah, I stayed through the whole school year, and maybe a little bit of the summer. So the medicine started end of summer, and then I stayed on through the whole school year. And it was kind of interesting because going back to school without a brother, you know, thankfully at that time I was in a very small school, and my class had basically, most of the people had left and a whole bunch of new people came in. So none of them really knew what had gone on, and none of them really knew that I had 2 brothers the year before and only 1 brother that year. So it was a little easier, and of course the other students would talk, so they all eventually found out, but it wasn't like as difficult because there were all these new people. But anyways, I remember that year when I was on the medication, there would be a day or 2 that I would forget, and that whole day I was just a miserable wreck. And it got to the point where one of my friends at school was like, did you forget to take your meds again? And I'm like, that's not very fun to hear when you're a junior in high school. But then there would be some days where I'd forget that I already took it, and I would take another one, and then I'd be super happy the whole day, and everybody's like, okay, calm down. So throughout that year, I was still seeing a counselor, and I was doing neurotherapy, which was basically trying to retrain my brain how to produce serotonin so that I could basically allow myself to be happy again
and
on its own
and
get off the medicine. And the neurotherapy actually worked really well. I didn't know it was working because...
Well, it's very bizarre. If you've never heard of neurofeedback, that's what she's talking about. And it's just sitting with some, what do they call those things? Electrodes on your head. And you watch a computer, and the therapist keys in what it needs to do, and you watch it, and when your brain does the right thing, it gives you a pleasing tone that your brain likes, so it gives you feedback, and your brain does it again and again and again.
Yeah, it's kind of like, for one of the things, it was like a little race of cheetahs, and you control one cheetah with your brain, and when your brain does what it's supposed to do, the cheetah moves forward. And that was one of the things we did. But the other weird thing that we did was we watched a ton of movies. So I loved going to neurotherapy because I'm like, yay, it's time to watch Lord of the Rings again in half-hour segments. And I think...
I don't remember that. But anyway.
Well, I think they were like, she responds really well to movies, so we're going to use part of that part of the movies as like helpful to train her brain. So so I was doing all of that during that time, and because of the counseling and the neurotherapy and just talking with friends, even I had a couple really good friends that were easy to talk to about all this stuff, and they actually understood instead of judging, which was great. I was able to get off the meds in a little under a year, and I haven't been back on them since. So
it was definitely a situational, circumstantial depression. It was not a clinical, genetic depression.
They said I had clinical depression, but I think it was more environmental. But I think just because it was so strong, so severe, so sudden, and it's just, that's what it was diagnosed as. But, so that first year was the hardest, and that's when I had most of the healing processes going on. I stayed in therapy for that for, I don't know, maybe 2 more years. But towards the end, I wasn't talking about the past anymore. I was talking about
what's going on today.
I was talking about school and like thinking about college, and I was starting to talk about normal kid stuff.
Moving on.
Normal kid.
Can we share one more thing before we finish this podcast?
Sure.
I would love to share about but the beginnings of your relationship with your husband.
Sure. So I met him sophomore year of college. We were in the same music theory class because we're both musicians, and he asked me out, and we went to a bowling alley, and we didn't really bowl. We ended up talking the whole time, and basically I had never been in a relationship at all, in a relationship in that sense. So I was kind of nervous about my first date because it was really like my first date ever. And I was also kind of nervous because I had shared this story of my family with several people in the past who had not responded very well. So my thought was, I really like this guy. If we have any chance of staying together, I should probably start out with, here's what happened to me in the past. So we ended up talking for about 3 hours at the bowling alley. I literally just shared everything that we went through with my brother. And I was totally honest, and I basically just said, if you can't handle this, then we're not going to work out.
Bye-bye.
Yeah. And it's like, this is me. I'm very open. I'm very honest, and I go deep. I don't like surface level conversations. And he was like, yeah, I like that. And then he was listening to my story, and he was just so sympathetic, and he just like had a lot of concern in his eyes as he's watching. He's like, you're so brave for going through that. I'm like, okay, he's a keeper. And then we got married 3 years later. So
Well, and I just want to share that because for the kids who might be watching, the teenagers, the young adults who might be watching, and you've gone through a lot that maybe was too much for you at the time that it happened. You know, I've noticed that Katie is a very compassionate person. She really recognizes when other people are hurting and suffering. Grief doesn't really scare you too much like it might. I mean, not that you love it.
I don't want to go through it.
No, but even in other people, when you see other people hurting, you have a lot of compassion for that because you know what it's like. And so it's changed you in some ways that maybe you would not have gone had we not been through this. But, you know, I look at your relationship with your husband, and I don't know that you would have gone that deep and had such a solid base if you had not opened up and shared like that. So that's just kind of a cool
and he might not
story.
Have liked me so much if I wasn't as deep and honest, and we might not have ended up together. I might not have gone to that college. Who knows?
Right. So, you know, let's come back again because I think we have a lot more to talk about and we haven't even gotten to the questions. So we'll come back and do this again. This is a little bit longer than we're used to doing. Do it in chunks if you can't watch the whole thing. If you have any questions that you'd like us, or topics that you'd like us to address, you can send them to us at carrie@carrieotoole.com, and we'll keep tabs on them, and we'll just kind of start throwing together some podcasts here that might, you know, our hope is that they just will help families who are going through this type of trauma. So we hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you, Katie, so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me. This is fun.
Yeah. And we will see you next time here on Broken and Brilliant.